All right. All right. Yep, we are.
Awesome. Alrighty, so can you please go to the next slide? We're just gonna go over our agenda.
Okay, I guess that's me then. So, okay, yeah. Let me just say a word about Phillips. So the Phillips Foundation, where I work, has been funding North Minneapolis schools since 2017. We've funded big stuff like the Community Connected Academy at Patrick Henry High School. And we've funded little stuff like replanting the planters in front of the main entrance at North High School. So we've just been really dedicated to supporting Northside schools, trying to listen carefully to teachers and parents and school leaders, and follow their lead. We also fund one other area, which is economic development. So we, at the same time that we're funding schools, we're supporting Black and other BIPOC property developers who are acquiring property and trying to develop it and keep it in the hands of Northside residents. So that's a big emphasis for us, but not relevant, probably not relevant to this conversation. But if people want to ask questions about that, I'm happy to talk about it. One thing that's a little different for Phillips as a foundation is that we do our grant making through a community-led process. So the fact that we're funding Northside schools is because we listened back in 2016, 2017, we listened to dozens and dozens of parents and neighborhood folks and nonprofits and students, and they said MPS schools are where we should focus. And since that time, we've worked with an advisor committee. I get the privilege of working with an advisor committee of MPS educators and Northside parents and students and people at the district, people at the Davis Center, and they have reviewed our proposals, and they go out and do site visits, and they are the ones that recommend our funding to our board. So and since that time, that committee has recommended $3.5 million of funding, which our board has approved without exception. So again, that'll be what happens with this process. The proposals that you write will go to the advisor committee, and they'll read them all. We'll have a great conversation about it, and they'll recommend what we should fund within the budget that we have for this project. Last thing I'll say about Phillips is that we will be moving into a new building on DuPont and Broadway. Maybe you've noticed that building is under construction there. It's just down the street from Juxta, which is another big construction project. But we're moving into that building with Tri Construction. They're a Northside 20-year-old Black-owned construction company. They'll be our co-owners and co-tenants in that building. So excited to move to the north side and be able to host things like this at our new space, maybe in June or July. So any questions about Phillips before we move on with the agenda?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, and then there,
add to that that I sit on the community advisory board as well. So I will not be judging your applications, but I did go through that process last year, which is why also we wanted to go through this application prep session to make sure that your applications, you're fully informed about what the application requires, and that you do have some support so that your application is picked. So
there's a note here that Chris needs the link.
Mr. Burrell, I can forward that to him right now.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that I had his email. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Nafisa, you want to take us through the agenda?
I do. I'll just send in Mr. Burrell the link. Yes, I do. All right. So last Saturday we spent about 3 hours together. That's not going to be the case today. We're looking at it's like more like a webinar. Some of the same activities that we did last Saturday, we're going to do again. So the folks who were here last time, then maybe this is a chance for you to share with the people who weren't some of your initial ideas. Maybe you didn't get a chance to talk to someone else at another table and you weren't able to hear their ideas. So again, this is a chance to build with educators you have not got a chance to build with. So we just did our introductions. We're going to talk about the point of inspiration with Genius and Joy. Really, it's the foundation in which we have built this grant opportunity on. And we hope that we will continue to center Dr. Goldie Mohammed's work throughout the summer as leaders in this work and as a professional opportunity for you and for the district to learn from community experts and education experts such as yourself. Then we're going to look at Genius and Joy from last year as well. We have Mix B, Brianna, who participated last year. So did Philip Identity. They had a camp at Henry. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to share some of their experiences from last year, their challenges, their successes, again, as some point of inspiration. And then we'll talk about going into this year, Genius and Joy 2022. Joel is going to share some additional details around logistics. Maybe he'll have some answers to some of the questions that folks had last Saturday and clarify any confusion that you might have this morning about this grant opportunity. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns right now about the agenda?
No, I think we're good.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. This is a quote from Goldie Mohammed, who is the author of Cultivating Genius and Equity Framework for Culturally and Historically Responsive Literacy. She says, we live in a period when there's no time for urgent free pedagogy. Our instructional pursuits must be honest, bold, raw, unapologetic, and responsive to the social times. Can you put in the chat one word or two words that jump out at you immediately from this quote? What is one or two words that jump out immediately to you in this quote? We live in a period when there's no time for urgent free pedagogy. Our instructional pursuits must be honest, bold, raw, unapologetic, and responsive to the social times. Raw, unapologetic, urgent, bold, yes.
Mhm.
Any more words?
And the fact that he's noting that urgency, no sense of urgency, but there is a sense of urgency. Our children are at risk, and we're the ones that's going to keep them on a level playing field.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is urgent. Absolutely. I see Philip name urgent as well.
Mhm.
Yes. Thank you for that. Would anybody else like to share why they chose their word? I'll invite one or two people. Again, thank you so much, Ms. Burrell. Why did you choose your word? Why did you choose bold? Why did you choose raw?
Well, I chose unapologetic because you just can't be sorry to do this kind of work, like where you're trying to inspire the future to get to their best self, whatever that is for them, whatever high bar standard you want to set for them. You just cannot be sorry to show up and give them the knowledge to help them get there. So that's why I chose my word.
Absolutely. And you know, we live in a very shaming and blaming profession where a lot of the times when we do what's right by our kids, it goes against the status quo. It goes against Eurocentric ways of knowing and doing and being. And so there is a tendency to make us feel shameful or guilty for doing what's right by the kids. So unapologetic, absolutely. Ooh, the shame, right? Shame is a tool of the oppressor. So not today, not this summer, and hopefully not moving forward. Will we accept that shame? So thank you for that. Does anybody else want to share? Otherwise, we're gonna move on. All right. Thank you so much. Miss B, I saw your mouth, you were talking. I don't know if you were sharing or if you were speaking to somebody else.
I was trying to share.
Okay, good. Okay.
Ago. So I chose social times because of all of the social media. The kids that we work with are always on social media at some platform. So that's why I chose that one.
Thank you. That actually speaks to the relevancy, right? Excuse me, and responsiveness to our current time. So thank you for elevating that. A lot of the time, especially Joe and I were talking about how education in Minneapolis has a very older and white teaching population as well, that a lot of times they like to cling to tradition in the ways that they've always done it. And a lot of times unwilling to move towards 2022, right? And the things that our students are actually experiencing right now in their current realities. So absolutely the responsiveness to the social times and social media is media literacy too. So while we're talking about literacy, we're talking about all the literacies, right? Not just the reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills, which are important, but so is media literacy, so is social justice literacy, equity literacy. It's all important. So thank you so much for that, Ms. B. All right, so Goldie Mohammed is our girl, my girl. Hopefully she will be your girl too. I don't know her personally, but I admire her work deeply. She's an author, Cultivating Genius. It is a internationally renowned text that centers the historical experiences of Black people here in America and how they were able to, cultivate a sense of literacy that was responsive to their times, and increase their intellectualism in addition to their consciousness and their advocacy as well. Dr. Goldie Mohammed is an associate professor of language and literacy at Georgia State University. She also serves as a director of the GSU Urban Literacy Clinic. So literacy is her jam, right? Researched the ways in which literacy was defined historically within the Black communities, particularly in literary societies. And she describes literary societies as kind of like a collective of Black folks who got together that centered increasing their knowledge around many different subjects. And that's the thing too, it was very interdisciplinary, but it served a purpose for them during that time. And it served the purpose of increasing their self-determination, their self-empowerment, and their self-liberation as a community and individually as well. So it's not like they were just learning to increase like their merits, right? Their titles. It served the purpose for liberation within themselves individually and collectively as a community. And it was very interdisciplinary as well. And she created a model and a framework for us out of that legacy, out of those literary societies. She defined literacy within the 4 frames within the book of identity, skills, intellectualism, and criticality. And then later on, she noticed a need for joy to be centered as well. And we're going to do the same activity that we did last Saturday, but we're going to do it again with our new folks so that we can see the possibilities within all these pursuits. Does anyone have any questions about Goldie Mohammed's work?
The thing I always tell folks about it is it just felt like in 2021, every teacher I talked to was reading her book. So it was really widely influencing, I think, educators, at least last year, and I'm sure into this year.
Absolutely. And our goal is to move from theory into practice. That's the one thing our district does not do a very good job at, is paying for our practice and creating some continuity in the space, a safe space to practice. And so that is our goal as well with this grant opportunities, to give you that, is to give you an opportunity to practice, to feel supported, to actually take what she writes about and be a leader in developing curriculum and pedagogical practices that move the work forward. So thank you for that, Joel. We can go to the next slide. Okay, another goal of ours, right, is to move away from what Dr. Mohammed defines as deficit thinking, okay? Deficit thinking comes up quite often in the book. And so I thought it was important for us to elevate that so that we can move from deficit to asset to abundance thinking, to excellence thinking. And some of the things that get in the way of this is deficit perspectives and thinking that lead to poor and basic instructional practices. So it is a secular situation where they feed into each other, right? The deficit thinking translates into really our low expectations, our unengaging educational instructional practices. Deficit thinking is a type of oppression that leads to racism and other forms of harm, because we're not working in the realm of possibilities. We're not working in the realm of excellence and creativity. We're making all these assumptions around what the kids are capable of, what you're capable of as an educator even. And so it is twofold, right? Because our students are often reflections of our practice. And so if we have a deficit thinking even of ourselves and what we think we're capable of, then that also translates into the classroom too. And it also can be defined as capturing someone's story as a single narrative, or starting with one story in a false, damaging, or incomplete way, which is why identity and criticality are present in the pursuits of Goldie Mohammed's work, so that we are intentional about elevating counter narratives, so that we are intentional about learning about who we are, what other people say we are, and who we hope to become. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns about that? About this deficit thinking, or would like to share your thoughts and ideas too? All right.
Well, I would say when you address like deficit perspectives and thinking lead to poor basic instructional practices, I mean, I feel like that's kind of something I walked into where it's like, one of the first questions I asked my piano class, for example, is how many of you have a piano at home? And then I quickly found out there's like this online virtual piano where you could use the keyboard. Well, I just quickly said to the music department, the people at the Davis Center, I said, that's not equitable instructional practices for class piano. And then I said to Yusuf, I need pianos. He's like, well, order some pianos then. And I started checking out pianos. You know, there's always the issue of shrinkage and things like that. But in the now, I'm like, I need to get this baseline moving upwards, right? I want these kids to learn to speak music, so I need them to be practicing. If they don't have anything to practice on, then I can't expect these results. So I didn't think, well, I'm gonna have to just do the best of what I got. I'm thinking, no, I'm gonna make this work and I'm gonna get something going on so that way I can raise the baseline, so that way I can raise the standard and keep the kids moving upwards. And how exciting a day it was when, you know, the first kid was like, I would like to take a piano home. You know, I was like, absolutely. We check out trumpets and trombones and cellos and saxophones and whatever. So I was just, you know, thinking outside the box and just like, I know other schools aren't doing this, but I am.
Absolutely, Angelo. It also speaks to this idea of urgency too, right? So
Absolutely.
like these things take, that's always Dr. Martin Luther King talks about when white moderates talk about wait, they really mean never, right? So there's no urgency around making sure that our kids have the materials and learning materials that they need in order for their genius to come out, in order for them to experience this joy. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. And thank you for your advocacy too. Could we get another voice? I think I heard someone turning on their mic. Would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, so like Angelo, your advocacy reminded me of just deficit thinking. I noticed uh when people are advocating for and pushing back against oh, but they can have these resources. It's not listened to until everyone when it feels urgent, obviously, to in this case people. And I've noticed that definitely with the pandemic because some basic things, we should have had laptop integration one-to-one in our entire district, frankly, beforehand. We saw the need, we saw the issues, we noticed that many students weren't used to using laptops or internet. Those things were done on paper. And we set ourselves up too, because we had this mindset of, well, they don't have it, so let's continue to do paper and all this stuff and do what we're used to. It just works. And even though we are setting up our students to be in workplaces where they have to proficiently use laptops. They have to proficiently be able to navigate that. They can't just navigate the internet on their phones. They have to navigate it on laptops. But that's what they're going to get at their workplaces and professional environments. So the logic that we are just going to say that, well, they don't have this. So it's meeting them where they're at in the worst way, because you need to meet them where they're at and give resources and give opportunities. You need to do both and. And if you're not doing both and, you're perpetuating racism. You're perpetuating white supremacy.
Absolutely, Philip. Thank you so much for that good word. Critical race theory talks about one of the components of it is entrance convergence. And so when it becomes a crisis in our school district where there is some moral exposure or immoral exposure in how they treat our Black and brown children in the district, then it became urgent. But it should always be urgent, right? The digital divide is real. We're not just segregated in our physical space. We're also segregated and isolated and disenfranchised from the digital world too. So thank you for elevating that. And so we're trying to, as within this grant opportunity, is to be able to provide those materials that educators need to do the both ands, right? We're going to meet you where you're at, but we're going to have high expectations for our district. We're going to have high expectations for ourselves. And we're going to have high expectations for our students to make sure that they get the things that they need in order to have a quality education to push them forward. So thank you so much for that, Philip. So how are we going to do that? Oh, I'm sorry. Was somebody going to say something? I didn't want to cut you off. Okay. So again, we always our district loves theory. There's always a book. There's always a theorist. There's always research that will spend time in committees and professional development, but we never get to the how part, right? The how that's going to make us better educators for our students. And so Goldie Mohammed gives us a framework, a blueprint of the how. And she calls those that how learning pursuits or learning goals. Okay. And she identified 4 in the book and then added 5 later. And those learning pursuits include identity, where you're helping your students to discover who they are, who others say they are, and who they desire to be. So I like to say educate, affirm, and validate, so that we're constantly cultivating a positive sense of identity within our students, within their community, so they can see how they have these assets, right? This cultural capital within themselves. And then how others might see them. Stereotype threat is real, right? Where our students know a lot of the times what teachers and society thinks about them, and it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy if we don't intersect that and affirm and validate their greatness. And so that is the goal with identities. And then also to understand who other people are within their community, within the classroom community, within their outside community, within the world, so that we can live in a world where we are accepting each other and creating a sense of belonging and connection instead of an isolation, because connection is a human necessity. And so we want our students to have the opportunity to connect with the world. The next pursuit is skills. Skills, these are the proficiencies we currently teach in literacy, or at least, right, we hope we do, which include like the 4 basics: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. I had just, as an English teacher, I had recently learned an interesting fact about listening and how that is a precursor to comprehension and reading, because it's helping the students and the young people do the cognitive work without the decoding work so that they can practice that first. And so how oftentimes do we teach listening as a foundational skill to literacy? So that's where that guilt comes from, right? So if I centered listening, just listening, people are like, what about all the other things? And so we're gonna elevate all the skills that go into listening, speaking, reading, and writing, interpreting, and making meaning out of a text, out of an image, out of something you hear. And then pursuit number 3 is intellectualism. The student should be learning new histories, new people, new places, new things. That's a lot of times where that experiential learning comes in as well, that helps to build cognition, is to be able to experience new people, is to experience new things. I know Mixed B, for their learning experience last year in Genius Enjoy 2021, they took the students on a tour of their city to different sites, historical sites, cultural sites, so that the students are exposed to the different opportunities to learn about themselves and to gauge in their culture that they may have never known of. So we appreciate that experience that you provided for the students last year, and we're hoping that we'll continue to do that this year. Pursuit number 4 is criticality. This is helping students to become woke, right? It's helping students to understand power and privilege, humanity, inequities, oppression, anti-sexism, anti-racism, and anti any of the isms that seek to minimize and invalidate their existence or anyone else's existence. And criticality, we talk about a lot of times how white teachers or teachers who weren't prepared to address the isms in their classrooms, a lot of times they avoid it instead of leaning in that discomfort, instead of finding ways to integrate into their classroom. Minneapolis presents a great opportunity for you to avoid criticality. And so we're grateful to Goldie Mohammed for censoring that and helping us to be intentional about that. And the last one is joy. Literacy instruction that animates the human soul, right? That helps the students feel alive, to help them feel their emotions, to feel joy and excited and proud of their learning and who they are. Does anyone have any questions, comments about these 5 pursuits?
This is Miss Burrell speaking again. You know, I'm thinking all 5 pursuits tie into making our children stand up, be bold, be able to say, this is not good anymore. This is the old way of thinking. We need to step into the new millennium. The children have the worth now to say that because of the media, because of the teaching structure that they're running under, because they see people like them teaching and experiencing great things. This gives them lots of tools to work with.
Thank you. I love that. Tools. Absolutely. we're building a new educational system around our students. So thank you. I love that you named it as a tool. There's one thing, Joel, if you can go to the next slide. So I talked about literacy being on a spectrum of different ways to interpret and make meaning and find understanding of things, but so is joy. Joy is on a spectrum as well. So here's another tool that I have discovered as well, is this emotional wheel, where it breaks down joy. So it's not just, fun, because a lot of times when I have done professional development around joy, the excuse a lot of times that educators, or the reason, we'll call it excuse, that has a negative connotation. The reason a lot of educators say they don't center joy is because they don't know how to have fun. When it's like, well, do you know how to bring excitement into your classroom? Do you know how to bring optimism and hope and eagerness into your classroom? Can you help the students be proud of who they are? And then playful, there is some fun there, right? Biggest teaching strategy, happy, content, right? Having a sense of belonging brings a sense of peace and contentment as well. And so, again, another tool for you to consider this concept of joy. Joel, can you go to the next slide for me? Thank you. And so we're going to do a quick activity. We did an extended version of this last Saturday, but I think that there's value in doing it again and being able to share out just one of the aspects of it. And so we did a ranking activity where I asked folks to rank on the top of the tables from top to bottom, which of the pursuits do they think are most and least important? So if you could, in the chat, rank from top to bottom, 1 being the most important, 5 being the least important, which pursuits do you think are most important down to the least important? So number 1 would be most important. Put it in the chat. 5 would be least important. This is oftentimes the choices that we have to make in our practice, in our instruction. What do you think is most important? Number 1 being most important. So you would list, if you thought the skill was number 1, that would be number 1. Number 2, you decide. Number 3, you decide. So I'll give you a moment to do it in the chat. Angela, are you saying 4? Did you list the pursuits, like pursuit number 4, pursuit number 5? I just want to clarify so we know how to interpret it. Okay, awesome. I would invite some more friends to join us.
Sorry, I don't know. Was that not proper? I felt like there's 2 ways, right? Either way, you're kind of ranking their importance, and you kind of have to put these in a flow in your room, So like what I told my kids, I say, you never know when I show up and I'm having a rough day. Why? Because I'm coming in here, I'm bopping, I'm in the vibes, and I'm trying to inspire you to do your best today. Because some kids walk into class, they put their heads down, and unfortunately, you don't have the ability to necessarily engage each one of them every time this is happening, right? So the way I can engage you is by welcoming you into my space in a happy vibe. You can ask Miss Kim. I am like the whistling IT guy that she knew over at Lucy Laney, and I think you guys are starting to learn that at Henry too. Is like I'm usually in a positive, happy mood. I just wake up like this.
You woke up like this. Okay, Beyonce, absolutely. Angelo, you did it perfectly. You did it perfectly. So thank you for sharing that. I'm probably the same way. I'm skipping through the Henry hallways, smiling and cheerful to everyone too, because it's energy, right? And when you share that peaceful, loving, welcoming energy, people catch it, you know, the students catch it, and it does help them feel like they belong and are wanted there. So thank you for sharing that, Angela. I will welcome 2 more people to share their ranking.
But I also wanted to say this too. It doesn't mean, I guess it's hard to leave this ranking up there like, oh, this is how I get down, because I think it changes day to day too, right? There are different days when you need to focus on this tactic or this tact or this skill or this focus. Like Friday, I felt like this Friday was like, let me give you guys some application, but let's have a more chill day where it's not so lecture based, right? And so I think these things change daily too. So I don't know. I don't know. Does it make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And that's the whole point. You just summed up the activity altogether. So we're here, you know, is that we think that we have to make a choice, right? We think that we have to prioritize oftentimes skill over any and everything, but to be able to participate in your joy is a skill, right? To be able to be self-aware, to be social aware, that's a skill too. That's an SEL skill. So that is the whole point of this activity, is that it's a menu, right? It's a menu. It's not something that you have to choose one over the other. One of the activities that we did last Saturday was where I asked our folks to group them and create categories around them and explain why they paired which pursuit with and why they did that with intentionality. So yes, it's a menu, but it's also intentional, because when you understand your students, when you are responsive, you are going to choose from this menu that suits who the students are right there in that moment with you. No, you please don't apologize. You do not have to apologize in no way, shape, or form. We are in a flow, right? We are practicing being in a literary society together. So your expertise is on par and equal to all of ours in the space. So thank you, Angelo. One more person. Can I get one more person to share their ranking and why they did what they did? We've established that there's no right or wrong. I hope that that is very clear. It's just a way to get you to intentionally think about these pursuits.
Last week, my ranking was a little different. I put identity for number 1, and then pretty much the same thing. And then joy was like 3 or 2 or whatever. But I agree with what Angelo's saying, like they kind of vary from day to day. But the reason I did my ranking the way I did today is that if there's no joy, if there's nothing there to catch your eye, it's hard to start the engagement. And then for me growing up, knowledge and learning was all about, you know, getting a better sense of your identity, especially as a Black person in this white supremacist colonial country. Having an identity outside of the one that school gave me was really important. And so trying to make sure that I'm validating that in the classroom. And then I put criticality third, because I think it's, for me, that's like one of the most important things that will help you navigate the world, is having an understanding of how power and all those things play out in your day-to-day lives and how to navigate that. So those are why I put those in my top 3.
Thank you for sharing that, Brianna. I love how you talk about how joy being the foundation, like the starter point, right? How often do our educators in this system say, like, you know what, no matter what, there's going to be some joy in this classroom, and there's going to be some joy in the things that the students do. And so what I heard you say is that then that feeds into the identity part, that feeds into the criticality part as well, right? Because then you're helping the students feel like they belong. You're helping them feel seen, and you're also helping them be critical of the world that oppresses them and invalidates their experiences and who they are, right? And their gifts and their assets and their talents and their feelings, right? And their pains. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. If no one else would like to share, we are going to move into our Genius and Joy 2021. We're not sure how many folks have seen this video. I believe Dario with Youth 360 Lens did an awesome job of capturing the vibe of the camps, and we are hoping to recreate, reproduce, and elevate and push it even further going into 2022. So Joel, you can please take it away. I know there's.
Yeah, I think this should be school. This should be how school is.
A lot of community folks who participate in the culture, who identify with the culture, naturally see those connections. And so they were able then to write curriculum that just naturally and organically worked together and made sense.
Just by providing the space that we did, the community developed positively. So though we did have to, this is what respect looks like, this is what we're not gonna do, this is what we definitely are gonna do. But once we set that, the kids took off, and it was very beautiful.
School should not be dry, it should not be a sit and get, it should be fun, joyful. Students should want to learn what they want to learn about. It should be busy, it should be loud. It can be quiet too, if that's the vibe that students want to have. But this should be the type of learning that we should be.
And some of the kids that were shy and said, oh, I don't dance, Miss Ann. So I'm like, just give it a try. Just give it a try. And by like day 3, they were up moving around. They couldn't stop dancing. And it was just great to see that I was able to bring that upon, and they were able to continue, and they had fun.
The grants basically asked educators to be innovative and to center joy and criticality. Criticality is basically dissecting and deconstructing power and oppression and elevating anti-oppression.
I think not having limits, having kids embracing more exploratory learning and being open to that, letting go of the time restraints. I know that was a lot, but all of that was moving together. So.
Being okay with joy in your classroom, I think we have this Eurocentric idea about what learning looks like.
The idea of the camp came from a kid. We were just kind of talking with our own children and kind of like, what would be fun to do for a camp? They're like, ooh, airbenders. And we just said, sure, let's do it. So then they have seen then that their idea mattered enough to make an entire camp of it.
If we think about North Band Camp, where they're centering HBCU style marching bands, high school students could learn how to play an instrument that they've never picked up before in their lives, learn about that instrument, learn about the HBCU, build community with other kids around North Minneapolis, and then learn from community experts on how to play an instrument. And not just learn, but be affirmed, be validated, and encouraged to pursue music as well, and then to put on a public exhibition where we invited the community then to come and affirm and celebrate their learning as well. I think it's just a beautiful example of incorporating community and expertise.
I hope that MPS learned something from this as a district. I hope that principals learned something from this. And that teachers also. We had kids that were having challenging days. We had no behavior support.
That by decentering yourself, you allow for students to engage more because they can talk about what they want to talk about.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy watching that video as much as I do for the, I don't know, the umpteenth time. Every time I watch it, I say this, I get a little frog in my throat, little thug tear in the corner, because it just brings me so much joy to see the joy of educators and students. I put in the chat, if you could give a critical response, like what are some observations that you've made while watching the video? What are some connections you might have while watching this video? Feelings, I just shared a feeling that it just brings me joy and it gets me excited. And any questions you might have while watching this video. Feel free to put it in the chat or turn your mic on. We have some last summer's participants here, so feel free to share your critical response as well as someone who has gone through the program or just watching the video here today in community with us. What are some observations, connections, questions, or feelings you have while watching this?
I'll say that it made me excited because I feel like this has been a really hard couple of years for educators. And so it makes me really excited to be able to bring in this component of working with young people, being creative, working on some other skill sets that still help to mold their identity, help them to explore, but not in the way that school always looks like. And then I really appreciated just all the positive energy, the fun, the joy that the young people were having. And I'm really excited to recreate that this summer with some groups of young people.
Thank you, Tamika, for sharing that. I heard a couple of feelings and observations, so thank you. Angelo said I appeared joyful and serious. Oh, joyful and serious. That's a combination, right? I wondered what was the time frames for each day. Also, what is the age demographic range for our site? Those are awesome questions that, I mean, I guess I could answer now. We're actually going to we're going to talk about the camps coming up in 2022 this year. I would also invite some folks who did it last year to talk about their day, how long their day was, what was their demographics that they served, and what site they did it at.
I can talk about Henry unless Philip wants to, or Art Roca. Okay. So at Henry, I believe our day was like 8 to 4 because we had a morning session and an afternoon session. And then we would flip them every other day. So whatever was the morning session on Monday would be the afternoon session on Tuesday. And that was to give students who may have been working or otherwise involved in other activities a chance to engage in all the different offerings that we had. The age group that we did last year was incoming 8th graders up. So it was like incoming 8th graders to incoming 12th graders. And then we had some graduated seniors and incoming seniors as youth workers. If I could share a feeling, I would say after doing that, like doing that program, I was like, I had so much clarity on how I want to engage with young people. And it honestly kind of made this year that much more hard for me because I wasn't working with the same team. I wasn't working with the same set of values. I was in a mess with no resources.
Thank you for sharing that, Brianna. Thank you for sharing your whole experience and also how that has impacted your school year this year, because it's hard. Like once you get the opportunities and the support and the resources and the team that you deserve, and then now to no longer have that, you know, oftentimes we feel it more because now we see really what we've been missing, you know. And so I'm sorry that you've been in a mess within a mess within a mess. And at the same time, happy for your clarity too. So thank you for that. Philip, I see your mic is on. Did you want to share?
Yeah. So, yep. Our program we had for about 2 weeks. Like I really enjoyed being a student just engaged with different spaces throughout the Twin Cities, and feel good about coming into a building that becomes that like base that like they use don't feel like comfortable with, and that was really nice to see. Um, and then I really enjoyed um, just having like the last day, uh, the last day that we were just talking about like missing the space and like wanting. Uh, y'all can hear me? Is that-
It was just a little kind of like faded in and out, and I just wanted to make sure we heard your voice.
Oh, okay. I think it's because um, I'm on.
Oh, yeah, so I really enjoyed a lot of students like yeah, okay, that's what I thought. It was my it was my earbuds. But like I really enjoyed like seeing them like interact with space and enjoy the stuff and the conversations that we had, learning more about their community, learning more about communities outside of Henry, even if they weren't from Henry. So like Brianna's putting in the chat that like the students didn't have to be from Henry. So a lot of the incoming eighth graders weren't actually from Henry as well. Um, uh, so yeah, they just had to be in Minneapolis during that time. We just recruited majority from Henry. The only thing that I wanted also is what is it? Uh just like the time to have more students. Like I think that was like something that we both wanted because a lot of students are like, oh, this is cool, and they started inviting their like friends and like everything to come by and like join in the experience. Um, I do agree. I do have to agree with Brianna that like coming into the school year, uh, the time to just sometimes a lot of the system drags down the ability for like I think students to enjoy education and just for me to enjoy an education and just like teaching them. Like I think the barriers, the mentally taxing late nature of our profession um makes it hard to teach. And I think I'm grateful for the summer program for giving both me the space to just try things out as a teacher in a way that feels like more comfortable for me, and like giving the space for it was kind of like a relief, like students are just going like if students like are centered and thought about and like I guess hugged and embraced fully, like uh, a lot of things around their education would feel better and would even feel better for me as a person who um, wants to be committed to the success of students in my community. So
Thank you for sharing,
I
Philip.
off of what he's saying. I really like what he was saying, but I wanted to piggyback off of it. I'm looking at this like when I was approached about being a part of this as a transition period. And what I really like is that it gives me an opportunity to kind of get them ready for what they're going to see when they walk into the room or what they should be looking for. You know, I think I said this at our registration night at Henry, and I said, if your teachers aren't teaching you the way you learn, right? Or something to that nature, right? If they can't learn the way you teach the way they learn. But if your teachers aren't teaching you, shame on you for letting them get away with that, you know? And so I'm pushing my students to be very critical about making sure they're asking the questions. But I also was thinking about it in terms of music and in my classroom and getting them ready to come into the fall and like, okay, let's shake the dust off because, you know, most often we don't take instruments from an eighth grade and transition them into high school. So that access piece, right? And that's why I was asking about, are these Henry students or where are they going to be in the fall? You know, just so I could kind of figure out like, oh, I'm just brainstorming how I'm going to transition them into their opportunities. But to piggyback off of what you're saying, Philip, even more is that we're introducing them to opportunities in their lives as far as education is involved. You know, whether it's history, becoming a historian, whether it's becoming a musician or a writer or an audio engineer or a scientist or an engineer for, you know, upstairs in our engineering labs. We have to teach them that each one of these classes that they walk into is an opportunity for them in the future, and they have to take each one seriously.
Absolutely. Thank you for engaging in this conversation and this reflection. I hope you all found this as a source of inspiration for you and your teacher sensibilities are tingling. I'm going to hand it over to Joel now to help you continue to imagine what summer 22 could look like by sharing some logistical information.
Is it possible to comment on what happened in that program that I was in last summer?
It is absolutely. Joel has to leave at 10:40, but I can stay on as long as we need to. So go ahead, Ms. Kim.
Well, I was at Laney. We are elementary site. I took part in a program that gave students the experience of working with cameras. We kind of teamed up with the sports event that was going on also at the same time. The students got to learn how to put a camera, you know, take care of batteries, and, you know, they learned every process of their camera and what every function meant. They got to take pictures of themselves, of their classmates, of, you know, when they went to the Vikings, they went to the Vikings stadium and got to take pictures of, and it wasn't the stadium. I just know it was a Vikings event, and they
Training camp. They went to training camp.
Yes.
Yep.
To take their camera, make collages at the end of all the pictures that they took. I watched the sports team as they studied a famous and Black sports person that influenced them. They put on a show in which they spoke about the people that they had studied, and just watching them engaged in something that they wanted to learn about, or someone they wanted to learn about, was just awesome to see the joy in them learning. You know, it's different when we tell them what to learn versus when they get to pick what they want to learn. And the engagement and the joy and the dedication is different. And so that was an awesome experience of just getting to see Black and brown and, you know, BIPOC children, and all children actually getting to engage and focus and be inspired and encouraged by something that interests them. It was awesome to see. And I look forward to being a part of that. Sorry, hope I didn't talk too much.
You did not, and your voice is always welcome. And also just Ms. Kim is at Lucy Laney, so it's the elementary school kids, but that does not mean that the older babies wouldn't enjoy an experience like that too. So thank you, Ms. Kim.
Two things I'll pick up on what you just said, Kim. One, just naming the teachers that were involved. Alcindor Holly led the sports history camp, and Lucretia Walton, I think it's Walton, did the Joy Collages camp, the photography camp, and they were both great. And the thing that happened kind of organically is that they started to work together, as you said. So that was really cool, that being in the building, doing those projects at the same time led to that collaboration, and they had the flexibility and the freedom to just do that on the fly, so to speak.
Yes. Yes, thanks.
Okay. I'm gonna try to get through this pretty quickly so that we have a chance for questions. So just a few things about what the camps are going to be like this summer. A lot of this is based on how we did it last year and how it's a little bit different. So just to name these 5 items. Last year, we said folks could do 1 or 2 weeks of camp. of Jesus and Joy. And we said that was a Monday through Friday commitment. This year, we're saying folks can do 1, 2, or 3 weeks of camp of Genius and Joy, and that it's actually a Monday through Thursday commitment. So making it a little bit more consistent with how summer school works. So also we've kept the pay. I mean, we've simplified it, but we have not reduced it. And even though the commitment has gone from 5 days to 4 days. So if you're leading a class, if you led a program last year for 5 days a week for 2 weeks, you would have earned a $3,000 stipend. If you lead a program this year for 2 weeks, Monday through Thursday, you will earn a $3,000 stipend. I'll say more about stipends in a minute. And then we're taking those Fridays and adding this optional learning and rejuvenation day idea. So we're going to have 5 of those in the summer, 2 in July and 3 that'll happen the first 3 Fridays in August. And those will be, I'll say more about that in a minute, but those are also compensated days. And then the last thing I'll say is that last year, educators generally had to buy their supplies and then get paid back. And this year, you can still do that if you wish. If you wish to purchase your supplies and get reimbursed, that's fine. But if you would prefer that we buy your supplies for you and ship them to you, that's now an option. So if you can find your items on Barnes & Noble or Target or Amazon and send us your shopping lists, we'll just buy it and it'll be delivered wherever you want it to be delivered to, your home, school, whatever. So I'll say a little bit more about a couple of those things. So starting with Learning and Rejuvenation Day. So one thing we really want to strengthen this year is two things actually at the same time I think we're doing here. One is celebrating teachers, educators, and giving you experiences that honor you and as a person who brings your whole self to your work. So we want to create opportunities where you can come together and have good food and peer fellowship, and also some kind of rejuvenating services. So we're thinking about like massage and facials. And last week we were brainstorming things. Somebody brought up like plants and kind of a horticulture in your classroom as maybe a project. And there were a few other ideas that mani-pedi stuff. We'll see what we can fit into the budget, but including those kinds of we'll call them therapeutic experiences in these days. But also the other thing we wanted to improve on last year was the quality of professional development we can offer to you. So these Fridays will include a chance to hear from your peers about how they're putting their camps together and learn together about how to create really wonderful experiences. You'll hear from Nafisa more time to really dig into how to take Goldie Mohammed's culturally responsive literacy framework and make it real in your work. And we also are inviting Groves Learning in for early grade educators who want to try out some of the practices that they use with kids with learning disabilities to teach them early literacy, which are now being adopted by schools and districts across the country for all kids. Because what we've learned, what Groves has learned, and what so many are now realizing is that when you figure out a method to teach literacy or math, but in this case literacy, to the kids who have the most barriers, it's actually probably a method that benefits all kids. And so that's like going to be a piece of what we do on our Fridays. But I would, if we can take a couple of minutes, we got a couple of new folks and even folks from last week, maybe you've had a chance to think about what you would like to see in these Rejuvenation Fridays. What would make you want to show up? What would you be excited about and make you feel, really honored and I would say celebrated, as a Northside educator? You can speak up or throw it in the chat. I don't know if anybody's suggested anything already.
And sometimes it's hard because we're not often asked these things like, what is it that you need? What is it that you want as an educator? What is going to help you feel valued? Well, the goal for the rejuvenation day is so that you are doing some learning, right? There will be some professional development, but also what's going to, you know, illuminate your humanity, your soul, as Goldie Mohammed puts it. So feel free to share now, put in the chat. And otherwise too, feel free to email me, Joel, if you come up with some ideas.
This is what we're thinking. This could change a little bit in terms of the dates, but again, just to stress, these are optional Fridays. It's not mandatory. We initially started thinking 4 to 6 hours. You know, if we can do this in less, we'll do it in less. The compensation would be an additional stipend for you on top of the stipends that you would get for leading your classes. And again, these are the dates that we have tentatively penned in. All right, so in the interest of time, moving on, a little bit about the stipends. This is different than last year based on, and so we're trying to improve on last year based on what we saw. First, for educators, so this would be anybody who's leading or co-leading a project. We often had 2 educators in a classroom, if you will, or co-leading a project. That's a great approach. The stipends would be $1,500 a week. So 1, 2, or 3 weeks, you would multiply that. You know, we know that each project is going to have different participation, you know, whether, so some will be bigger, some will be smaller. We do want to put effort into involving students so that we're not doing all of this and then having, you know, only a modest number of students show up. So a ballpark would be recruiting about 10 students per educator. If you end up with more, that's wonderful. If you end up with a little less, or even if you design for a little less because of what you're specifically doing, you know, we can talk about that. That's, I think we would trust your thinking on what you're trying to get out of this experience. You know, one thing just to say is, like, part of this is a professional development experience for you. So we want to make sure you have the time in that week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to learn and test and reflect on what you're trying to do. Maybe it's a new way to do a piece of the curriculum you're going to do in the coming year. Maybe it's a new classroom, like a student, like a classroom culture building thing, whatever it is. So it's not all about just packing the room with students, right? And you'll propose something, and then the advisory committee will look at it, and we may come back to you and say, you know, looking at all the programs that we had apply, we're going to ask you to, we love what you're doing, but it needs to be a little smaller, or maybe we'll say, can you make it bigger? So just to know that your proposal is the beginning of the conversation, and we'll keep talking. Also, every site that's doing these projects needs to have a site coordinator. So this is a person, turned out to be kind of like your front office kind of function, handling pickups and drop-offs and busing and food service and being a floater for all the in-between activities that educators need help with. It turned out to be more demanding than the classroom educator role. So that's a higher stipend. We will be, Phillips and Nafisa will be working directly with the site coordinators on some of their duties. So they understand, like, how they're going to be involved in getting supplies to teachers, or what the district is going to expect of them in order to handle the food that would be coming to your sites. So if you are, we think about the site coordinator as being responsible for what's happening in the school during the period that camps are active. So there might be totally separate activities happening in different parts of the school. And there can be one site coordinator kind of assisting with all of that. So like if Henry had 2 concurrent camps happening at the same time, you don't need 2 site coordinators. You can have one site coordinator supporting all of that. So if you have a question if you're thinking about your project and you don't have a site coordinator in mind, just be in touch with me or Nafisa, because we might know whether someone else or a different project has identified such a person who could also support your work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And, you know, oftentimes educators, we're not getting the opportunity to work as admin, to work as coordinators. And so this is also a learning experience for you as well as a site coordinator too. So we would encourage you to come to the session on June 4th so that, you know, you can continue to grow those skills too. Just want to add that.
But okay, I have to say one thing. One thing we did learn that last year is that we had some site coordinators that were also leading classroom work, and it was too much. So we need to separate those roles. So if you want to be the site coordinator, be that kind of oversight, that's wonderful. It doesn't matter what your current role is, you can do that, but you're not also going to be delivering the camp. Like, you need to have somebody else in with the kids on a full-time basis. So those are two separate roles now. Can't double duty that. Questions about this before I move on? Okay. Supplies. So we, like I said, we'll order them for you. Supplies last year ranged from, you know, the things you would expect, like, you know, markers and like paper face masks and modeling clay, to snacks, to we actually bought a bunch of musical instruments for North High School so they could get their marching band work off the ground. So we're willing to talk to you about what you specifically need. We do have a general budget that we'd like people to try to work within, which is $500 a week for every 20 students. So if you run a 2-week camp and it's pretty modest, like 20 or less students, you'd have $1,000. If you have a big camp with 60 kids for 2 weeks, you'd have $3,000. But again, that's a negotiable amount. We do have a budget for this. We don't have infinite money, so we need to balance it out across all the sites. But if one site doesn't need that full amount, you don't have to spend that full amount. And if another site needs a little more because they've got a special piece of equipment they want to buy, or they're going to have some field trip costs that are going to be, you know, significant, we can discuss that. You can put that in your proposal. And just, yeah, what I said there, field trips and any kind of costs outside of busing to and from your site and food service that you would get from the district, like those are provided, but everything beyond that, you need to work within your supply budget to do.
Can you say that again, Joe? You
So
said that
you don't have to pay for busing to and from your site. So we'll pay for, you know, what would be typically like the basic busing service, and the district is providing, you know, lunches, cold lunches and cold breakfasts. I know there were issues about that last year. We're going to talk in terms of the quality and satisfaction with what you got. That's feedback I'm providing to the district. So I'm hoping that we can get a little more quality assurance from them. But if you want to do snacks or other kinds of food above and beyond what you're going to get from the Central Food Service Department, that's going to be in your supply budget. And if you're going to rent a van, if you're going to pay for admission to the walker, that's in your supply budget.
So Joel, I just want to ask real quick. So is this based on the building, or is this based on the individual classes when you talk about the budget per week?
So we think about it based on the project that you're running. So if you do a music camp and there's a separate thing happening at Henry, those are two separate supply budgets. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and like I said, ask for what you want, ask for what you need, not for you. I'm going to say, be reasonable, ask for what you need. And, you know, we'll talk to you if we can't do that. So we're not going to, if you said, I need $750, a week or whatever to do what I want to do, ask for it. And if it's too much, if we can't afford it, we won't say no. We'll just say, we can't do that. We can do this much. So we'll talk. It'll be a conversation.
Hi, this is Miss.
Want to ask real quick, I know you got to get out of here, but so like when this is all said and done, if there are, materials or physical property, where do those go?
They're yours. You keep it. I mean, it's a kind of an honor system because we're paying for this with private money. You're getting it. The school district has no record of this stuff. So we had people who ordered like a headset, microphone, Bluetooth speakers last year. I mean, I hope you'll keep it in your classrooms, but at the end of the day, that's between you and the higher power. So it's yours.
I got a quick question.
I'm just wondering because it's musical instruments, so that's a different beast altogether. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, who's?
There's stuff you could. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Mr. Burrow.
Oh, I have a quick question. I have high schools, and I plan to have it going through North High School. I don't know about the busing part. Some of them drive. So how's that work? If I don't need busing, I just don't need it.
Yeah, basically, if you don't need busing, you don't need it. We did have a situation last year where the Henry program, this is not exactly what you're asking about, but I'll just mention it. They were doing transportation to field trips by recruiting parents and maybe even other students to drive students, to different sites. And so they used some of their supply budget to buy people gas gift cards as compensation for that.
I wanted to ask Joe, is Minneapolis paying for the buses that get people from the sites? And
I don't have a final answer, but I think no. My hunch is we're going to end up paying for that. It's frustrating to me. I wish they would, but
yeah. And I'm wondering for sites like Henry, who we need way more money to get, because the field trip one, that's when I've done the feedback, whatever from the kids, that's the main thing they want to see come back this year, along with us cooking our food, because they do not like the school lunch food. So I'm wondering if the money for those buses, and this is just, maybe we can have a conversation later, but for whatever you guys are going to pay for the busing, if we could have that for our busing for our field trips, so people aren't taking on that liability of transporting people in their own vehicles.
So the best thing I would just say is when you're writing your proposal, and if you're asking for a lot of money in your supply budget and you're not asking for busing, make sure you make that point, right? So I'm not going to say that we're going to give people back money if they don't use busing, because I don't want to disincent schools to use busing. Busing is turned out to be really important to get kids to programs. And I don't want a school to not offer that if just because they want more supplies. But if you really don't need it, like in a high school setting, and you feel like you need more supply budget, make the point in your proposal. And I do have to say one lesson we learned from last year is, well, it's two different lessons from the same experience. One is every program costs a different amount. And so we were fine with that. We will be fine with that. It's not an equality system, right? You need the resources that you need to do your project based on your vision and what the students need. At the same time, we do have to balance a budget across 5, 6, 7, 8 schools. So if one program is costing $5,000 a student and another program is costing $500 a student, we have to, let's say it this way. If one program is asking for $5,000 a student and another program is needing only $500 a student, we have to figure out a way to be fair across those sites so that we're providing adequate funding to everybody. So there is a balancing that we have to do, but my basic message is ask for what you need and we will talk about it if we can't just approve it out of hand or exactly as you wish.
I have one more question, Joel. Yeah. And this is just to put it on your mind kind of thing and see what happens in that conversation. But I'm wondering if Minneapolis has a budget that they are allotting for the food per student as a part of this partnership, and if they'd be willing to kick that back to certain sites if those sites have deemed, hey, thank you, but no thank you, we'll figure it out ourselves. Can you just kick that into the pile and we'll figure it out from there? I just wanted to throw that idea out there as something to maybe broach in conversation.
No, I love that actually. And in the fact that they actually cook the food at Henry, that's what they did last year. I mean, that would give MPS maybe an excuse to it would say, we need something a little different for this program. And so can you either subsidize the cost of the food or give us the food, the raw materials instead of the cooked items? I don't know. But no, I think that's a negotiating point. Thank you.
And it's also aligned with our farm to table program that we have at some of our other schools. Just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
The district is already investing in this type of programming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only challenge sometimes with that as a chef is allergens, right? And who's going to take the legal ramifications of that as the chef or as the kitchen manager. So that's the kind of the caveat behind why the district maybe has that kind of control mechanism in when they partner or when they, are sending out foods or whatever. So as a chef, I'm just telling y'all that's kind of the caveat and the challenge behind it too.
So this may be something that we can use the site coordinators to be quality control on, because one of the roles of the site coordinator is safe food handling. And if there's a way we could extend that to be like a guard against, allergen issues, that could give the district some reassurance that we can actually handle food preparation on site. So, okay. I think maybe we should just roll through this slide. This is the kind of a deep explanation of what Loring did last year. They had a very thorough, high quality application. Do you want to say anything about it, Nafisa?
I don't. I just wanted to say that it was just very thorough, very detailed, very thought out. So that way there wasn't a bunch of questions and feedback when the committee looked at the application. The goal is so that we can hurry up and get to the planning and implementation. So if we do the work on the front end, we won't have to do so much on the back end. So that's it. This was Sheila Webb's proposal from last year at Loring, and they were very intentional too. I do want to bring it back to the learning pursuits around, we're asking that you include at least 2 in your application to just practice being intentional about that. A lot of times that's not hard for us, but they were very intentional about covering all of them and making sure they explained how they were aligned. And that's it.
So we can share these slides with folks. Still, I think a to-do from last Saturday. So you can read through all this at your leisure.
Can you share them in the chat right now? Is it a linked slideshow?
Oh, yeah, Nafisa, can you do that? Thank you, Brianna, because they're a Google Doc. So last Saturday, we also had a staff member from the Minneapolis Foundation do a little bit around their specific application portal, just to be clear. So Phillips is an independent foundation. We have our own money, we make our own decisions, but we are operationally, we are housed at the Minneapolis Foundation. So when you apply to Phillips for a grant, you do it through the Minneapolis Foundation portal. And I am not an expert in this. I'm going to stop sharing since that's the last slide. I'm not an expert in this, but we have experts and they are around. And if you start your application and you have questions, reach out to me or Nafisa. There's actually a third person that I think is listed on the application material, the stuff that we send out, and you'll get an answer that same day for sure to solve your problem and keep you moving forward on the application. Once you see the application, you'll realize it's not very extensive. I mean, like Loring, you can write a lot if you wish, but I would say most applications last year were about 2 pages of narrative, a staff list, a schedule, and a budget. But happy to answer any other application questions or funding questions. I want to say one thing. So the applications are due on the 5th. This is Thursday. And our advisory committee meets on the 11th. So on the 5th, you guys apply, all the applications come in. On the 6th, which is Friday, I will send all those applications to our advisory committee. It's I think currently 8 people. And then they'll have from the 6th to the 11th to read them. We meet on the evening of the 11th, which is a Thursday. And I fully believe that they will be able to rank those proposals and decide what we can do within our budget, and that I will be emailing and calling site coordinators and all the applicants on Friday to let them know whether they were approved or not. And then for those that are approved, we'll move forward into kind of negotiating budgets and any other changes we have to do with the project. But any other questions before I hop off?
And I'll stay on if you have any program ideas or questions or need help with your application.
All right, hearing none. Thanks everyone for, was there a question?
Not a question. I just wanted to make sure. Henry team, are people able to just hop on this Google Meet to quickly talk about what projects we're thinking of? Talk quickly about what a schedule could look like and a date to finish this application by. Or I put the Google link in the chat, but is anybody besides me available? Okay, Angelo says yes.
Yeah,
I can meet.
Okay, Roka says yes. Okay.
You said the word scheduled. I just want to say one other thing. We've kind of told the district, and we will, I think this will be true. Most of the camps will be offered first 3 weeks of August. But if you have a different schedule that works better for you, if you want to do your thing in July, that's fine. You can propose dates in July. Obviously not June, since you're all working until the end of June. But anyway, schedule is flexible based on what your preferences are. All right, I'm going to sign off and hand it over to Nafisa. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joel. You're free to go. I know Henry team, I don't want to keep you if you have some planning to do. I just wanted to stick around if anyone had any more questions. Joel is gone too. I think it's still being recorded, but my gaze sometimes might get in the way as well. So if you needed to ask additional questions or needed some brainstorming, actually I can stop the recording too. Let me know.